Did you apologize to Donald Trump about Ontario's anti-tariff act?
I did apologize to the president. The president was offended by the act, or by the ad rather, and it's not something I would have done, which is to put in place that advertisement, and so I apologize to him. I'm the one who is responsible in my role as Prime Minister for the relationship with the President of the United States, and the federal government is responsible for the foreign relationship with the U.S. government. So things happen, we take the good with the bad, and I apologize to him.
It starts with a familiar sound, a soft vinyl crackle, a confident presidential tone. Tariffs hurt every American worker, says the voice. You turn your head. That's Ronald Reagan. But this isn't a clip from the 80s. It's a brand new advertisement running on U.S. television.
My fellow Americans, Prime Minister Nakasone of Japan will be visiting me here at the White House next week. It's an important visit because while I expect to take up our relations with our good friend Japan, which overall remain excellent, recent disagreements between our two countries on the issue of trade will also be high on our agenda. As perhaps you've heard, last week I placed new duties on some Japanese products in response to Japan's inability to enforce their trade agreement with us on electronic devices called semiconductors. Now, imposing such tariffs or trade barriers and restrictions of any kind.
And it isn't from Washington, it's from Ontario, Canada. The ad uses Reagan's voice to attack the very tariff policies Donald Trump built his new economic strategy around. Within hours, Trump erupts. By morning, he does what few thought he would. He slaps Canada with a fresh 10% tariff hike, and the message is clear. Carney's apology means nothing. October 25, 2025. The news breaks before sunrise. Reporters rush outside the White House lawn as Trump calls the ad a deceitful foreign interference campaign. He waves a printed still frame of Reagan's face from the commercial and calls it fake history. The move sends shockwaves through markets and leaves Canadian diplomats stunned. A single 60-second ad has now spiraled into a multi-billion-dollar trade standoff between two allies whose economies are welded together. To grasp the magnitude of this, remember, Canada isn't just another trade partner, it's America's largest. Every day, trucks haul more than $2 billion worth of goods across that border. Cars, grain, oil, lumber, machinery. Tariffs here aren't theoretical. They're real numbers that ripple through jobs, prices, and family incomes. A 10% increase may not sound dramatic, but in an interconnected supply chain, that's a hammer blow. The ad itself aired during the World Series. Primetime, America's Television Temple. Produced by Ontario's communications agency, it was part of Premier Doug Ford's Fair Play North campaign. The team edited Reagan's 1987 speech warning that protectionism always ends in self-destruction, omitting the part where Reagan also justified selective tariffs to defend national interests. It wasn't illegal, but it was provocative. And for Trump, who's built his brand on strength and retaliation, it was a line crossed. Sources inside the Oval Office say Trump's first reaction was disbelief, followed quickly by fury. He reportedly slammed his hand on the table, shouting, "They used Reagan. They think this is funny?" Advisors urged calm. The next day, calm was gone. Trump appeared before cameras flanked by American flags and announced the tariff hike. "If Canada wants to play propaganda games," he said, "we'll play economic hardball." The crowd of reporters buzzed. It wasn't just rhetoric. The executive order had already been signed. In Ottawa, Prime Minister Mark Carney scrambled. He'd already called Trump privately after the first controversy, expressing regret over Ontario's ad. He publicly confirmed the apology, saying, "I told the president this was not approved by our federal government, but the damage was irreversible." Trump dismissed the apology as too little, too late. "They laughed at us," he told supporters later that day. "We're not the joke anymore." Ford, under pressure, offered to pull the ad. By then, it had already racked up tens of millions of views online. The phrase, "Reagan's Revenge," was trending on both Twitter and Truth Social. For many Americans, it looked like Canada had resurrected an American icon to humiliate their sitting president. Trump couldn't have asked for a better political setup. He framed the tariff not as punishment, but as patriotism. In one stroke, he defended Reagan's legacy and reignited his America First fire. Behind the scenes, the fallout was immediate. American car manufacturers, like Ford Motor Co., and General Motors began recalculating costs. Every pickup truck made in Detroit uses Canadian aluminum and steel. With tariffs in place, those costs rise, and so do prices for buyers. Analysts estimate this single policy could cost U.S. consumers billions if it holds for more than 6 months. And yet, Trump's team believes the optics outweigh the economics. Voters don't study spreadsheets, one insider said. They remember who looked tough. For Canada, the consequences are heavier. The United States buys more than 70% of its exports. Even a temporary slowdown hurts. Carney's government began quietly briefing companies to brace for delays. Energy shipments slowed, lumber contracts froze, and railways saw cancellations. In Alberta, exporters warned they'd lose deals to Asian suppliers. The irony is sharp. While the U.S. tries to pressure Canada, the policy may push it further toward the very diversification Trump fears. Ottawa is now fast-tracking talks with the Philippines and ASEAN countries to reduce USC dependence. But perhaps the most fascinating element is how fast diplomacy collapsed. 1 week earlier, both nations were preparing a joint energy memorandum. A week later, all calls were suspended. A year of negotiations vanished in a day because of a 60-second broadcast. It shows how brittle modern diplomacy can be when perception outruns policy. The White House treats image as strategy. The audience becomes the weapon. Meanwhile, across both borders, the people caught in the middle watch helplessly. In Michigan and Ohio, factory workers fear layoffs as component costs rise. In Ontario, small manufacturers lose U.S. contracts overnight. Economists warn the tariff hike could drag both nations' growth by up to a quarter point. Politicians argue on television while real people adjust their grocery budgets. That's how trade wars work. They start as headlines, end as higher bills. For Trump, this standoff serves 2 goals. First, it reminds his base that he's still the same hardliner who confronted China and Mexico years earlier. Second, it reframes Carney, who's often praised for calm diplomacy, as weak, apologetic, and ineffective. By rejecting the apology, Trump gains political dominance and a clear headline: Trump defends America, Canada backs down. The accuracy of that narrative doesn't matter. The perception does. Inside Canada, the tone shifts from regret to defiance. Carney, frustrated, tells Parliament that Canada will not be intimidated. Ford calls the tariffs disappointing. Canadian media outlets turn the issue into a national rallying cry. For once, even rival provinces stand united. But unity doesn't pay bills. Companies plead for clarity. Truckers crossing the Windsor Bridge report longer inspections and mounting delays. Every extra minute costs money. And yet, despite the strain, both sides seem unwilling to blink. For Trump, lifting tariffs too soon would look like surrender. For Carney, caving under pressure would damage credibility. The impasse drags on, quietly bleeding both economies. Investors shift focus to Asia and Europe. Analysts describe it as a Cold War at room temperature. No explosions, just slow freezing. Then comes the twist. Reports emerge that the Reagan ad was never meant for U.S. primetime. Insiders claim the initial buy was for Canadian television only, but a third-party distributor syndicated it south of the border to maximize reach. That accidental overshoot, a marketing quirk, ended up detonating the biggest trade flare-up in a decade. Neither side will admit fault, but behind closed doors, staffers on both continents know how absurd it is. Billions in tariffs, diplomatic strain, and market panic, all born from a mistargeted commercial. The lesson couldn't be louder. In today's hyper-connected media world, perception is policy. A single message, misunderstood, can move markets faster than any minister or meeting. And that's exactly what happened here. The White House turned indignation into leverage, and Canada turned embarrassment into defiance. Both leaders are playing to their domestic audiences, while trade officials quietly tally the damage. Now, the question everyone's asking: will these tariffs last? Insiders say, maybe not. Trump's team sees them as a negotiating chip. Carney hopes time will cool tempers, but the scars will remain. The trust built over decades between Washington and Ottawa now feels fragile, conditional, and performative. For everyday people, it's about to get real. Prices on imported cars could climb, construction materials might spike, energy deals could get delayed, and for small towns near the border, where jobs depend on the daily flow of goods, the slowdown already feels like a silent recession. And so, the story ends where it began. with a voice from the past. Reagan once warned that trade wars are easy to start, hard to stop. In 2025, his words proved prophetic. Canada borrowed his voice to make a point. Trump borrowed his legacy to make a stand. And now, two nations bound by friendship stand nose to nose, staring through a mirror of pride. For viewers like you, this isn't just about tariffs or apologies. It's a glimpse into how 21st century politics actually works. Emotions over economics, performance over policy, image over dialogue. And that's why this isn't over. Because in the age of screens and slogans, every clip is a battlefield, and every headline, a weapon. Stay tuned. We'll keep decoding every twist of this story. Next episode, we'll break down how these tariffs ripple into auto prices, job cuts, and new trade routes that could permanently reshape North America. Subscribe to America Decrypted, where politics meets clarity, and every headline hides a bigger story waiting to be uncovered.